Welcome back to the channel, I'm Weem. Tonight, we're diving deep into the world of trucking, where the open road meets spine-chilling horror. These are not just stories, but real-life experiences from truckers who have faced the unimaginable. They've battled sleep deprivation, treacherous roads, and loneliness, but nothing could prepare them for the horrors that awaited them. It was a dark and stormy night, the kind that sends shivers down your spine. The kind of night that makes you want to curl up in a ball and hide under the covers. The wind howled like a banshee, and the rain beat against the windshield like 1,000 tiny fists, relentless and unyielding. But for one trucker, there was no time to stop or even slow down. He had a deadline to meet, and he was already running behind schedule, pushing his rig to its limits.
I've been driving trucks for over 20 years, seen every kind of weather and road condition. Seen it all, accidents, breakdowns, even the occasional tornado that seemed to come out of nowhere. But nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to experience on that fateful night.
Jack was driving down a desolate stretch of highway in the Midwest, a place where civilization felt a million miles away. There wasn't another car in sight, and the only light came from his headlights piercing through the darkness. Suddenly, he saw something strange in the distance, a shape that didn't belong. It looked like a figure standing in the middle of the road, unmoving and eerie.
At first I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. I'd been driving for hours and I was starting to get tired, my eyes heavy with fatigue. But as I got closer, I realized that the figure was real, not a figment of my weary mind. Tall and slender, wearing a long flowing coat that seemed to flutter in the wind.
Jack slammed on the brakes, and the truck skidded to a stop, tires screeching against the wet asphalt. He squinted through the rain, trying to get a better look at the figure, but the storm made it difficult. But it was no use. The figure was just standing there, motionless, in the middle of the road. The figure was just standing there, motionless, in the middle of the road, as if waiting for something.
I reached for my CB radio and tried to call for help, my hands shaking. But the storm was interfering with the signal and I couldn't get through. I was all alone, isolated by the tempest.
Jack took a deep breath and tried to calm himself down, his heart pounding in his chest. He had to do something, anything to break the tension. He couldn't just sit there all night, paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. He slowly started to drive towards the figure, honking his horn in a desperate attempt to scare it away. As he got closer, the figure turned its head and looked at him, its gaze piercing through the storm. Jack could see its eyes now, and they were glowing red, like embers in the darkness.
I slammed on the brakes again, my heart racing. And this time I put the truck in reverse, my hands trembling on the wheel. I didn't know what that thing was, but I knew that I didn't want to find out, not on that night. I backed up for what felt like miles, until I finally reached an exit, my mind racing with fear. Took the exit as fast as I could, and I didn't stop driving until I reached the next town, my heart still pounding. Never drove that stretch of highway again, the memory too haunting to revisit. And to this day, I don't know what I saw that night, the image still vivid in my mind. But I know one thing, I'll never forget it, the fear etched into my memory forever.
Mark, a seasoned trucker, was used to the solitude of the open road. He relished the freedom of long hauls, the ever-changing scenery his only companion. But this trip was different, unlike any he had ever experienced before. It started subtly, a prickling sensation at the back of his neck whenever he stopped at rest areas. An uneasy feeling that someone was watching him, lurking just out of sight.
I brushed it off as fatigue, the long hours playing tricks on my mind. But one night, parked at a desolate truck stop off the beaten path, the feeling intensified. The unsettling sensation grew into a palpable dread, a fear that gnawed at his very core.
He stepped out of his rig, the air thick with an unnatural stillness. The usual hum of distant engines and the crackle of CB radios were eerily absent. He felt a chill crawl down his spine, despite the stifling summer heat.
As I made my way back to my truck, I caught a glimpse of movement in my side mirror. It was too fleeting to make out, a flicker in the darkness at the edge of the illumination cast by the sodium lamps. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in the stillness.
He climbed into his cab, locking the doors behind him, the hair on his arms standing on end. He tried to reason with himself, attributing it to his weariness. But deep down, a primal fear gnawed at him, refusing to be ignored. He couldn't shake off the feeling that something was out there, lurking in the shadows, its eyes fixed on him.
I spent the night in my truck, engine idling, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of my rig sent shivers down my spine.
The next morning, he hit the road, hoping to outrun the unease that clung to him like a shroud. He drove for hours, the sun beating down on his truck, trying to convince himself it was all in his head. But every time he glanced in his mirrors, he imagined seeing a fleeting shape, a dark silhouette against the glare of the sun.
Days turned into nights, and the feeling of being stalked never left me. I stopped at well-lit truck stops, avoided desolate routes, and kept my CB radio on, clinging to the sound of human voices. The entity, whatever it was, seemed to stay just out of sight. A phantom presence felt but never seen.
He tried to rationalize it, telling himself it was just his imagination. But the fear was always there, a constant companion on his journey. He started seeing things in his peripheral vision, shadows moving just too quickly, fleeting glimpses of something unnatural. The open road, once his sanctuary, had become a prison of fear, a place where he felt trapped.
I started talking to other truckers, sharing my experience in hushed tones, only to be met with knowing nods and shared stories. It seemed I wasn't alone in this eerie experience. There were whispers among the trucking community of a presence on the highways, a malevolent entity that stalked those who dared to travel alone.
The endless ribbon of asphalt stretched out before Frank, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, casting long shadows across the landscape. He was on a long haul, the kind that made you crave company, even if it was just the voice of a stranger on the CB radio, breaking the monotony of the endless drive. As the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, Frank spotted a lone figure by the side of the road, thumb outstretched, a silhouette against the fading light. A young woman, her face obscured by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat, stood there, almost blending into the twilight. Something in Frank's gut told him to keep driving, but the loneliness of the road got the better of him, urging him to stop. He pulled over, the air brakes sighing as he came to a stop, the sound echoing in the stillness of the evening.
Thank you kindly. Been waiting here a while.
She climbed into the passenger seat, bringing with her a chill that seemed to settle over the cab despite the warmth of the summer night. An odd contrast that made Frank shiver. Frank tried to make small talk, asking her name and where she was headed, hoping to ease the tension. But her answers were vague, her gaze distant, as if lost in some faraway thought, making Frank feel even more uneasy. As they drove, Frank noticed a strange scent in the air, a cloying sweetness that he couldn't quite place, adding to the growing sense of unease. The woman hummed softly to herself, a haunting melody that sent shivers down Frank's spine, the notes lingering in the air like a ghostly presence. He glanced at her reflection in the side mirror, but all he saw was a dark, indistinct shape, as if she were fading into the shadows. The miles ticked by, and the moon climbed higher in the sky, bathing the landscape in an eerie silver glow, casting everything in an otherworldly light. Frank's unease grew with each passing mile, the silence between them becoming more oppressive. The woman spoke little, and when she did, her words seemed to hang in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning, as if she were hiding something. At one point, Frank reached for the CB radio, hoping to catch a friendly voice, break the unsettling silence that had descended upon the cab. But the static was all he heard. But as soon as his fingers touched the mic, the woman turned her head, her eyes flashing in the darkness, a warning in her gaze. A cold dread washed over Frank, and he quickly withdrew his hand, the fear gripping him tightly.
Don't you worry. We'll be there soon enough.
Frank gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles turning white, the tension in his body palpable. He had an overwhelming urge to pull over, to order the woman out of his truck, but the fear held him back. But something held him back, a fear so primal it froze him in place, making him feel helpless. The hours stretched on, each one longer than the last, the night seeming endless. Frank's eyes darted nervously between the road ahead and the enigmatic figure beside him, his anxiety growing. He felt trapped, caught in a nightmare from which he couldn't awaken, the sense of dread overwhelming. As the first rays of dawn pierced the darkness, the woman stirred, her presence becoming more tangible. She turned to Frank, a strange light dancing in her eyes, an unsettling glint that made his heart race.
This is where you leave me.
Frank pulled over, his heart pounding in his chest, the fear almost paralyzing. The woman stepped out of the truck and turned to face him, her features obscured by the shadows of the early morning light, an eerie silhouette.
Thank you for the ride. You've been most kind.
And then, as quickly as she had appeared, she was gone, vanished into thin air, leaving Frank in stunned silence. Frank sat there for a long moment, his breath caught in his throat, trying to process what had just happened. The rising sun painted the eastern sky in hues of gold and crimson, but all Frank could see was the empty stretch of road where the woman had stood moments before, a haunting reminder of the night's events. The open road can be a lonely and unforgiving place, especially for truckers who spend countless hours traversing its vast expanse. These stories offer a glimpse into the chilling encounters that can haunt those who make their living on the highways. Remember, these stories are real and could happen to anyone. Stay safe out there, and if you have your own story, share it with us in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more chilling tales.